Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So, so we really will just cover the main topics about an introduction to advocacy.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the session on development of policy and advocacy at the African International Mediation Week. Today, the 30th of November, 2020. We commence this particular session with the words of the national anthem recited in English. O God of all creation, bless this our land and nation. Justice be our shield and defender. May we dwell in unity, peace, and liberty. Plenty be found within our borders. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once more to the session on development of policy and advocacy. This is a masterclass on international best practice in policymaking, advocacy, and networking. Our facilitator for this particular session is Ms. Susan Waruhiu. Ms. Waruhiu is the Advocacy Manager at the Business Advocacy Fund. Good morning, Ms. Waruhiu.
Good morning, Sarah.
Together with Ms. Waruhiu on the panel, we have Mr. Kimutai Cherono, who is a mediator, as well as Ms. Christina Gatura, who is a mediator. Ladies and gentlemen, this particular session is on development of policy and advocacy. We'll be learning how to engage with stakeholders, governments, national as well as international agencies. And our facilitator for today, Ms. Waruhiu, will be able to take us through. Ms. Waruhiu, you may proceed kindly.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. You can see this. You can see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So my name is Susan Waruhiu. I work with the Business Advocacy Fund. And we'll be taking you through this session on policy making and advocacy and dialogue within the public sector. Just to give you a brief overview of the Business Advocacy Fund. The Business Advocacy Fund aims to support business membership organizations to engage in dialogue and advocate reform of public policy. We provide support through training, as well as providing grant aid for projects. And we have been backed by the Danish International Embassy, a development agency, since inception from 2006. The Business Advocacy Fund has been around for the last 15 years, but has now formally closed as at June 2020. Over this time, we've been able to conduct 349 trainings to 463 different organizations, and we provided grants for 295 advocacy projects directly to 98 BMOs. So just to cover the learning objectives for the day, this session will really get us to understand what is the meaning of the enabling environment, understand the importance and purpose of dialogue, as well as being aware of various steps within the advocacy process. So at the Business Advocacy Fund, BAF, we advocate to a 5-step approach to advocacy, which has worked for us over the 15 years that we have been in this business, and that has been quite successful. So advocacy can be very complicated, but once you break it down into different sections, then it becomes much easier to manage. I'll also take you to a session where you'll be able to identify an issue and prepare an advocacy strategy. So really, I think the first thing is to define what a policy is, and just in very simple terms, a policy, is defined as an action based on certain principles or a set of principles on which to base certain decisions. Another definition of policy that we usually come across is that it is a course of action adopted and pursued by government. So really, government is responsible for the policy making process, and hence a policy can actually emanate from a government agenda of the day or a political agenda of the particular government in power, such as the Jubilee's Big Four agenda. But it's also important for the private sector to contribute to the process of the policy making, because another definition of policy that is given is that once a policy is articulated, it contributes to the context within which a succession of future decisions will be made. And these decisions will have an impact on the private sector and how the private sector operates and how businesses operate and engage with each other. So now that we've established that governments have the role of setting policy, we then need to think about how does government then intervene? And we tend to find that government is able to intervene through legislation and regulation. But regulations also have an impact on the business environment and the economy, because it usually has advantages and disadvantages. Some of these disadvantages come as an element of costs, which are usually accrued to businesses, whereas the benefits of regulation accrue to society. It's also a very delicate balance that governments have to ensure that they meet competing pressures, that they're able to align priorities and concerns of different stakeholders. So for example, you can't implement a policy or a regulation that is pro-business but negatively affects the environment. And other elements that regulations have is that they have financial and administrative burdens. So financial burdens can be initial and recurring costs, such as license permits or your land rates that you have to pay every year. And an example of an administrative burden is, for example, when a business has to compile all of the paperwork to demonstrate its compliance to the different sets of regulations. So really, once a policy is set, then governments recognize that they don't exist by themselves, or they don't exist in a vacuum, and they cannot exist without the private sector. In turn, the private sector cannot exist without the government. So the role of the government, once they've set the policy, is really to ensure that they create a political and economic environment, a stable environment for economic growth. Government must also provide public services such as infrastructure of power and telecommunications, as well as ensuring that there's a stable investment climate. And this will affect the cost of doing business. For example, ensuring that there are elements of contract enforcement that can be applied, and the availability of skilled labor by ensuring that there's a good education system. Once government has set this environment, it then creates what we call an enabling environment, which encourages investments from the private sector. Now, the private sector comes in and invests. They are able to create goods and services to satisfy customer needs, and also create wealth through employment and through the generation of incomes. Now, once the private sector has generated these incomes, they're then able to pay the levies and taxes of the financial burdens that are created, that have been set by the government. So you're able to pay your income tax, and you're able to pay your business permit taxes. And this money really provides the revenue, that the financing for government to ensure that they're able to provide their public services and continue to provide a good investment climate. So really, they're all intertwined. One cannot exist without the other. just to capture it in short, the reason why we usually use this logic is that if you improve the environment for businesses will invest and they will create jobs, and this will lead to an increase in the gross domestic product of the country and economic growth, and eventually a reduction in poverty. So really, there are several elements that contribute to the enabling environment, some of which we've touched upon. So BAF, because we focus on the business enabling environment, we really tend to look at all of the factors that contribute to this environment. And it's important to note that there are both positive and negative elements that enable an environment. So even as you have regulation that is positive and power, you also have an issue of smuggling and corruption, which can still be an element of an enabling environment, even though it is negative. So some of these factors need to be considered throughout the process of lobbying and throughout thinking about what really creates the ideal environment for businesses to thrive. But one of the most effective ways that we have found over the years is that for you to be able to influence the enabling environment effectively and easily, such that the impact that you have within the enabling environment from the proposals that you make is through regulatory reform. And we do recognize, it's also important to recognize that there are various forms of regulatory reform. You can go about this in different ways. So one of the ways is that you can then have less new regulation. So in cases where you have government policies or government agencies that are coming up with new proposed regulations, you can advocate for that regulation to not be passed or to be abolished. There's another way of improving the existing regulation. So in this case, this would looking at reducing the administrative burden of regulation. Say, for example, reducing the number of permits that you need for a business to operate and amalgamating them all into a single business permit. You can also provide guidance for compliance for your members and various stakeholders, because this can then ensure that businesses are actually aware of what they need to do, and then they can actually do it and be compliant. And then you can also promote a culture of inspectors, or rather than inspectors, such that you have the public sector employees are really coaching the businesses and the stakeholders to understand what is required of them, rather than always being the fact that they are finding them, they're there to find them, and really just, always be pointing out the negative elements of what is not being achieved. So how do we then interact with the government? It's really a process of dialogue. One of the definitions of what public-private dialogue is, given by the World Bank, is that it refers to the structured interaction between the public and private sectors in promoting the right conditions for private sector development, improvements of the business climate, and poverty reduction. It's also about stakeholders coming together to define and analyze problems, discuss and agree on specific reforms, and then working to ensure that these ideas become a reality. It also provides, so really dialogue provides an opportunity to understand the opposite party's point of view. So if you're in the private sector, it gives you an opportunity to understand the public sector's point of view. And if then you're speaking with government, dialogue allows them to be able to understand where you're coming from. So one of the prerequisites for effective advocacy is that there must be dialogue, whether in this case, we will talk about it as private-public dialogue, because it is the private sector that is initiating the dialogue. It's important to realize that for dialogue to be successful, it means that you have to have regular contact, and you have to be able to build confidence within the conversations that you're having. So it really provides a ready means of communication if you have already open channels of dialogue with government. And this is what will really support the effectiveness of your advocacy. So this was taken from a quote in 2015 by some researchers who identified that governments that listen to the private sector are more likely to design credible reforms and to win support for the policies that they design. Dialogue improves the flow of information and builds legitimacy. It also improves trust and understanding. So really that just covers a summary of what I have discussed before. But even as you look into dialogue, you need to consider who are your stakeholders. In this case of identifying your stakeholders within dialogue, when you're approaching the public sector, you need to think about who are your allies and who are your adversaries. It's good to think outside the box of, there may be other institutions or organizations that probably can feed into the issue that you're trying to advocate, or they can actually support you because in one way or another, they are actually affected by this issue and they would like to see a resolution to it. So this diagram really just gets us to think, to recognize that we need to think outside of the box, think about other institutions that may not necessarily be directly involved with us, but who would benefit from successful advocacy of the issue that you're trying to focus on. Of course, it's important to recognize that as you go further and further outside of the diagram, you may find that some of these groups of people may be less influential. However, they will still be able to support your advocacy when it comes to the bigger level of going through. Also thinking about how the advocacy issue that you're trying to push forward, you need to think about how then does it affect these people. So then that will then help you to structure your advocacy strategy. Sorry. Okay. So the reason why we need to look at how to structure an advocacy strategy is because advocacy is really the act of influencing or attempting to influence the way that somebody else thinks and acts on an issue. This is very important because without being able to convince somebody that they need to act differently or think differently about the issue that you want to address, then they will not be convinced that is something that they need to actually action. And this is why public officers really need to be influenced if they are going to have if they're going to make an effort to improve the business environment. So really, if we just look at what is the public policy making process from the public sector's point of view and from the government point of view. So how a policy making process begins is that there must first be a problem definition. The problem must first be identified. So you must be able to show what is the particular issue and name the issue in the sense that, if I can use an example of waste, for example, you need to say, what is the issue with waste? Is it the lack of management of waste, or is waste inadequately managed or addressed within the particular context? Giving a little bit of background, history, and context of why the problem has arisen, how the problem has arisen, what has happened in the past with the problem will also help you to be able to really define the problem properly and clearly in a way that is easy to understand. Remember, the best way to get your point across is to make it as simple and clear as possible. And the next step you need to do is you need to have a problem analysis where you think about what is the impact of the issue that you're trying to address. So for example, what is the impact of not addressing solid waste management? What are the options of how you can address solid waste management? And what are some of the implications that can happen if solid waste management is not addressed, as an example. And then the third step is to really look at what is the solution to the problem that you have identified. So it's really good for you to be able to say, this is the best option. So from the second step of the analysis, you will have different options. And then in the third step where you give the solution, you really give the best option that is most viable and the justification as to why that is the best option. Why do you want policymakers to adopt that particular policy and to go in that way forward? So really you have, once you've identified the policy stream, you then need to think, the problem stream, sorry, you then need to think about what is lacking within the policy. So how should the policy be structured? What legislation is there that exists that maybe needs to be strengthened? Or if there is none, then how then do you create a policy that is all-encompassing? Remember, a policy has to be something that is long-term. It really has no end, but it is something that can be implemented over a long period of time. And the third stream you need to look at is ensure that you have the backing of the political sector. Without the political influence, it becomes very difficult for you to then form a new policy. But once these streams all come together, then you have a new public policy that emerges that can effectively address the issues that you are willing to push. Some of the factors that influence the success of getting a policy enacted is really the willingness of the public sector to reform, advocacy competency of the people who are pushing the advocacy agenda. So in this case, you need to think about, are these people aware of the different advocacy techniques and are they able to use these techniques effectively? You also need to think about availability of resources. So in this case, being able to finance advocates going into meetings and that sort of thing, and also just having a strategy. So in this case, we call it project management competency, but it's really about what is your advocacy strategy as well. And so, as I mentioned earlier, BAF follows a 5-step approach to advocacy. And really the first step is to identify what the issues are. The second step is to understand the issues. Step 3 is where you develop responses and proposals, which you then go with you carry these proposals with you into step 4, where you influence policymakers. One of the steps that we find tend to be left behind is that there's never any follow-up, and that is where step 5 comes up. So all these steps are important in their own individual way, and we'll just run through them quickly. So in step 1, it's really about, you need to identify and frame the issue. And some of the various ways in which you can identify and frame issues is getting feedback from your members, either through surveys or through questionnaires, and members as well as different stakeholders. Keeping an eye on what is going on within the press and the media can also help you to pick up on some issues that may be affecting your particular sector. Building relationships with other business membership organizations or non-governmental organizations. They may have probably insight or other connections with different members of the public sector who may be able to give you a heads up on an issue that is coming up that maybe you would not be able to get that information early on. It's also important to monitor the activities of key ministries, departments, and agencies, and as much as you can, forge relationships with employees in these ministries, departments and agencies, MDAs, as they'll be able to, for example, give you a heads up before an issue becomes light of day. One of the ways that you need to identify and frame an issue, you need to just carry out some research in brief. This will then help you to identify what exactly is the scale of the impact. And by scale of the impact, we mean how many people or how many businesses are affected by this particular issue that you want to address. The depth of the impact really would be looking at what is the financial impact of the particular issue that you want to address. And then we have to be able to frame the issue. So framing the issue is really, as an overview, defining what you think is the most appropriate reform required. So is it that a new policy needs to be adopted? Even an implementation of an existing policy is something that can be an issue and can be a way to a way of reforming an issue, just so that you're able to address the issue such that the policy exists, but government is not implementing it, and that then creates an issue in itself. Step 2 is really just to identify the issue, and this is now where you would really put the heavy burden of research upon. So some of the benefits of the issue of undertaking deep research is now to really be able to go into getting facts and figures of the scale and the impact of the issue. Using facts to support your argument then makes your argument a lot more credible. Here is where really you need to then focus on what is the rationale for the public policy, in terms of, is it current, is it something that is going to be sustainable, and is the policy and regulation going to be implemented as designed, or should you then make changes in that implementation? It also helps you, doing research also helps you to understand how to reform the policy process, and also and how does that reform affect your other stakeholders. So you need to be able to identify stakeholders. It's important when you identify stakeholders, if you can get an opportunity to talk with them, understand their opinion on the particular issue you want to address. It's good to also get policymakers into the discussion, just so that you can be able to understand what is their point of view, what are the issues that they may have with the proposals that you're making. And as well as, because they will also be able to influence some of the policy solutions, or be able to guide you on which is the best approach to address that particular issue. Research will also help you to really be able to define the problem in a very clear language, such that you're able to communicate effectively what is the issue and what are the possible solutions. So the third step is really policy positions. We call it policy positions. And this is the point where you develop your proposals, you put your proposals together. So when you're writing a proposal to government, you really need to think about who is the audience that you're addressing, what are the benefits that they can get from it. You need to be clear about the purpose of addressing the issue. So a policy position paper should be a minimum of 2 pages and a maximum of 6 pages if it is to get the attention of a policymaker. It needs to be able to cover 3 important issues. It needs to be able to describe the issue, it needs to explain the current policy and history, and it needs to describe the options, impacts, and implications very concisely. That should be the background of it. It should then make recommendations that are clear and precise and easy to implement. Once you get to that point and you write your recommendations, you then need to go back and think about what are the conclusions of some of the recommendations that you have given, and see whether those recommendations are viable. Do they have sound evidence? Are there statistics to back the recommendations that you are giving? Essentially, the point of this step is really to help policymakers to do their job, to be effective. Because remember, if you support the policymaker, then it becomes very easy for them to also support your advocacy issues and to be able to get it through. So again, it needs to be clear, succinct, and compelling. communicating issues clearly and solutions effectively. Stress the benefits to all parties. So don't only focus on stressing what are the benefits that your sector can achieve, your stakeholders can achieve, but you also, and this is where now your interaction with other institutions and stakeholders comes in, because you're able to then tap into getting to understand the potential benefits for other people and other sectors. Step 4 is really engaging with the policy makers. At this point, you need to then figure out an effective strategy. And when you're developing a strategy, it's really thinking about, so questions 1, 2, and 3 are the questions that you would ask yourself. So what is the issue that you want to address? And then you're able to describe the issue. Once you're able to describe the issue, you then need to think about what's the situation that you want to achieve. So you describe what the final output is. How would you go about bringing the desired change is now where we talk about the advocacy project. So really the strategy revolves between the two square rectangular sections with the arrows that showing you that your advocacy project is your strategy of how you go from the initial, so the identification of the gap or the problem and describing that gap and that problem, and then describing the final position or what it would look like if that problem is addressed. So the questions are just here to guide you on how to develop your strategy. So you need to think about, is your strategy going to be technical or is it going to be contentious? You need to think about what is the timing of your strategy? Sometimes it can be, it could be that an issue that you want to advocate for just has a bad timing. Either, the political party is just not into it, or it has actually negative implications onto the economy. So these are some of the things we need to think about. Listing your driving forces. So what are your main objectives? What issues can actually support the success of your advocacy, but you also need to think about what are some of the issues that can prevent your advocacy from being successful. And to the best of your knowledge, you should try to then find a balance, try to address some of those restraining issues and say, it's when you do your research, you identify, for example, this can be a problem to the success of our advocacy. So then you can come up with a solution of saying, yes, we realize that this can be a negative impact, but this is the best way to address that negative impact. And that really then goes to show your credibility and that you have done your research. Remember that even as you go to advocate, policymakers will come back to you with questions. If you've done your research comprehensively and very well, you'll be able to respond to some of those questions effectively and actually convince the policymakers that yes, and illustrate to the policymakers that yes, we have thought about it and this is our proposed solution to it, or this is how we would propose to go about addressing that particular issue. So that really increases your credibility the credibility of your advocacy. Of course, when you're doing your strategy, you also need to think about who are your allies, who are the people who will support your advocacy, and how can you bring them along? What benefits would they also get from that, from coming onto your particular advocacy agenda? So just to discuss some of the different advocacy tools and techniques that you can use. So there should be no limitation as to which advocacy tools or techniques that one can use. However, it's important to ensure that you choose your particular advocacy tool carefully and wisely. For example, you need to think about, is it timely for you to organize a press campaign in the middle of your advocacy process? The timing of that press campaign really has to be well put. If, for example, there's a discussion ongoing with the public sector and they are still not in agreement with you, it probably may not be the best time to do a press campaign. Whereas just when you've gotten congruence and everybody, the public sector is on, policymakers have agreed to go with your particular advocacy suggestions, then that would be a good time to use a press campaign to applaud government, and also remember to always go back to government and say thank you. Thank you for the support, recognize their contributions and recognize their support. Even as you go about advocacy, sometimes it's not sometimes, but it's good to ensure that all of your members and stakeholders are aware of what you're doing. So once you have developed your policy proposals, it's good to ensure that everybody who is aware of that particular advocacy issue is speaking from the same narrative. So the proposals should be shared, the evidence should be shared, just so that you never know when a policymaker could meet one of your members and say he could be looking for a third-party opinion. And when the member is questioned about it, he has no idea, or he has his own opinion, which is not the opinion that you have been pushing forward. So it's good to ensure that everybody who is, your members are aware, your stakeholders are aware, such that they're sending out the same message, and that will then push the success of your advocacy. So step 5, is really about monitoring and evaluation, which is step 5 of following up. This is a step that you really gets forgotten a lot of the times. So yes, I've already talked about the press release, cheering the government for providing success. Then you need to monitor the progress. So for example, say a department that you have been advocating with needs further information or needs additional evidence to be able to support the proposals that you've given to them. So at this point, you can have additional research that you're doing. You can be speaking with third parties, for example. So it's also good to monitor what other third parties are doing. So sometimes when people have research that is ongoing, you may be able to get additional information, which then you can feed your contact at the ministry, department, or agency, just to help them push and overcome a hurdle that they are facing. So in this case, step 5, yes, is about follow-up, but it also incorporates some of the other steps of, for example, going back to influence, going back to research, going back to writing, refining or improving the policy proposals that you had already written down. So really, it incorporates all of the other 4 previous steps. And really, you need to evaluate your own process and evaluate your organization in terms of, are you moving forward in a way that is bringing people together, ensuring that your strategy is moving in tandem and is changing with the ideas of your membership and getting more people on board. So some of the things that you can evaluate are, what are the outcomes or some of the strategies that you're pushing? Behavior change is one of the outcomes that you can be looking at. You can be looking at maybe there are benefits, there's savings on costs that have come across as a result of your advocacy, as a result of implementation of a particular regulation, for example, and what are the benefits. And sometimes it's also important to remember that there are some benefits that probably, even as you have done your research and written your proposals, there are other benefits of cost or unforeseen consequences that could emerge from the proposals that you've given. So it's a good idea to keep researching, speaking with the market, talking with third parties, just so that you can identify. It could have been something that maybe you missed out, but has actually been a direct result of that could be positive or negative unintended consequences. And lastly, even as you continue to advocate, just some of the basic rules that we tend to advocate for, we tend to tell our BMOs to keep in mind is professionalism will take you very far in your advocacy process. It will give you credibility. when you share something with somebody within a government institution, sometimes they can actually give you that information in confidential terms. So it's important to respect the confidentiality, that the fact that they are able to trust you with that information, because if they then, it's important to just understand, respect those boundaries, and have integrity in any advocacy strategy that you do. Yeah, okay. That is the end of my presentation. So Sarah, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Susan Waruhiu from the Business Advocacy Fund. This is Wangari Kabiru and the convener of Wasilianahub. Thank you very much for your presentation. And yes, today's session is to enable mediators to learn the good practice for the development of policy and advocacy. And the backdrop of this is for purposes of engagement with stakeholders who include governments, and with national and also with international agencies. And so the presentation that we have had today as part of the pre-conference at the Africa International Mediation Week with Ms. Susan Waruhiu of the Business Advocacy Fund is to enable us to have an introduction that will now lead us to the next part of the conversation with our panel for today. And our panel for today, we have Kimutai Cherono, who is a mediator and an advocate. Kimutai Cherono is a mediator and also an advocate. And he's also the proprietor of Compleat Consultants Africa. And also in panel, we have mediator Christina Gatura, who is a mediation trainer, and she's the founder of Jesilo Consultancy. So we will receive remarks from the two, and this should enable us to broaden the conversation that we have. And also at the same time, if there are any inquiries that they have, then we will be able to also have them from the two of them. So allow me to kindly invite, we will start off with mediator Kimutai Cherono, and then we will be able now to move to mediator Christina Gatura. So Kimutai Cherono, kindly.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It is actually
to
5 minutes to lunchtime, or
yes,
to midday, yeah. Thank you very much, Susan. I really appreciated the thought and the ideas and concepts that were propounded in your presentation, and I apologize for being late. The lesson for that is when the app tells you, do you want to update your app, you have to do it, because I was just waiting in the waiting room and the app wouldn't let me in. I had to reinstall it. So I apologize for being late, and I hope you'll be sharing the notes so that I catch up on what I missed. I'd just like to take a look at some of your comments in light and in light of the mediation field. We're actually at a situation right now where there are a couple of acts which are been generated and presented to Parliament with a view to creating the mediation bill, which will monitor and work with mediators. Now, we do know that some of them seem to have been presented and created with interests in mind. So I really appreciate your advocacy steps, and we should have met like 3 years ago. Then we would have been in a much more position to actually create and execute these steps. The first comment I'd like to make is about the policymakers. I think you know that in our political system, the policymakers and the MPs are, some of them are quite motivated towards implementing policies that are for the larger good. However, getting their attention is really a problem. So I appreciate the steps that would be taken towards the policymakers. But I also see that if we were going to, as mediators, influence them or educate them on what we would actually like, it would be, it has to be a long sustained approach rather than just putting stuff out in the public and hoping that it will succeed. I really liked the advocacy and description, and the strategy element is very crucial, because what happens is that right now we have a lot of people who are very interested in mediation, but everybody has their own little piece of the agenda. So I think it would be very important for us to have forums where we can agree on a harmonized agenda. And that brings us back to the issue about the policy position. The comments you had made about writing out what is actually intended for the consumption of the people who are the policymakers, but also include what you can point to them as being positive for both the public and also the policymakers and also the people who are actually conducting mediation. The other question, the other point you made was about the bodies to drive advocacy. I think we need to have bodies which are both representative of a lot of our mediators. And for that, whereas we have a few which are coming up, such as Wasilianahub, etc., there is very little overreaching coordination, which really needs to be put into place if mediators need to speak with one voice. So something along the lines of the KEPSA Alliance, but for mediators, would really be useful. I did note very, very positively that you mentioned that in our presentation, we also have to gear towards the impact and success with society. All of us as mediators really feel that we would be in a position to assist society by resolving disputes, and it would create additional peace, harmony, but also enable the increased productivity due to disputes being resolved quickly. And that also brings us back to the point you had made, which is that we need to have research. Because if we do not have facts and figures when we're talking to the policymakers or when we're presenting our opinions, if they're not backed up by research, it's very easy to dismiss them and say, well, if you don't have any information, how do we really know these things will happen? So that's also another part which has to be worked on. And those are the comments which came out of your, I'll release the parts which I saw. So I'm hoping I'll get the notes later on so that I can actually update myself on what the first portions were. The questions I have is that in your chart with the policy makers, the citizens were right on the outside. And it seems to me that the citizenry or the interest of the citizenry should be paramount. So if you are doing something and you wanted to affect policy, the people who are advocating must be able to show that what they're advocating for is in the public interest. Now, I'm not going to go into business and theories like trickle down and see whether or not they actually do affect the generality, but I just want to make the point that yes, you can advocate for your own interests, but advocating for the interests if they are conducive to the society at large. And I was wondering what your opinion would be on advocacy without that particular bent or understanding as in the fundamental part of it, of their proposals. And then the other thing was, and this is more of a comment, and maybe you can also guide us or give me your view on it. When we look at the mediation bills and the ones which have been presented, it brings us brings us to the crux of the matter. What do we need in a mediation bill? Now, from mediators, there are not that many. We do not want to have the process of mediation restricted. the whole point of having mediation as a form of dispute resolution is that it is fluid and mediators are able to take advantage of whatever in the circumstances of that dispute can lead towards a solution. So starting to have, oh, you have to send out an invite within 14 days and all that stuff brings us back into the rigidity of the judicial system, which is what we're basically escaping from. So I think one of the things we have to worry about is, even if we're going to advocate to the policymakers about mediation, how much do we really want them to create a system, and how much do we want them to cater for the essences of what we as mediators want? And briefly off the top of my head, one of the things we really need is a place where we can register settlement agreements, so that at the time we conclude a mediation, we have that. And I remember asking somebody, well, we have a registry of documents, which is at Ardi House. And that is where you can go and register your will or any other documents of import. If mediators decided to use that, it would actually be a position of, if anybody has any dispute about a settlement agreement, you can refer them to the registry of documents, and there can be a sealed mediation agreement. So maybe it's a matter of educating the people and also educating the mediators that this is what you can use. The other thing was the registration of mediators. One of the things that will happen as mediation gains in popularity is there'll be a lot of people going out there claiming they're mediators and not necessarily doing a good job. It will create problems for the mediators, because at the end of the day, once people undergo abortive mediations and find that the system was not really done well because the mediator was not trained or was not following the ethical guidelines, that is something which we would ask the government for a system. But if we had our own mediators body, that could also be a counterpart, in the sense of the government would give it weight and say that this is the only body which is authorized to accept mediators and give them accreditation. And then the other thing is that we need to enhance and standardize the trainings. And that is something which the government would really need to help. So I hope I haven't taken more than 5 minutes. Well, I have, but thank you very much. And I think Christina is supposed to do it next.
Thank you very much, Mediator Kimutai Cherono, for your remarks. We will receive remarks from Christina Gatura, who is a mediator, a mediation trainer, and the founder of Jesilo Consultancy Kenya. Then Susan will be able to give her feedback or add to the comments. And today's session is aimed as an introduction to advocacy, the discussion as mediators together. So there is probably a lot that we can be able to follow up with other quarters or with yourselves. And we hope that this has helped mediators to clarify to themselves or the best practices that are there. So Mediator Christina, and then we will be able to have Susan's responses. Thank you. Christina?
Okay, thank you, Wangari. Thank you very much. Just to take the shortest time possible, my contribution observation as I do the mediation trainings in this country, I've observed quite a number of things. I don't want to go back to what Susan has said. She has given a very elaborate presentation. Susan, I appreciate that. My brother Kimutai has also come in strongly with a very and as we train, or as I train around the country, there is something that I've realized, I've noticed, and I think we could look at it in terms of research and also as a point for advocacy and lobbying for mediation and ADR in general. Now, one is the area of professionalism that she mentioned, that has to be maintained by mediators, by ADR practitioners. And by the way, Wangari, I'm now an ADR practitioner after graduating with a diploma, advanced diploma in alternative dispute resolution. And that has really also opened my eyes a lot. So through research, as Susan mentioned, we can look into ways of harmonizing the trainings so that we are producing mediators who are, who are professional and who are actually we are looking at the same thing. Because having a chat with the judiciary, the mediation registry at the judiciary, I was able to learn that there are some training institutions that are not meeting the standards of the expected standards by the judiciary. So there is need for that kind of harmonization. Now, the other area is on implementation. As we implement mediation, or as mediation is implemented in our country, there's need also to harmonize the same, because we have currently in Kenya, we have what is known as the court annexed mediation, which is a mandatory mediation, mediations which have been mandated by the courts. And looking at other countries where mediation has been accepted, or ADR per se, where ADR has been accepted, looking at areas like South Africa, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, amongst others, Bolivia, areas where, and the US also, where ADR is working, it has taken a long time. It has taken many stages of, the mediators working through the landscape of acceptance by the community until where they are now. They may be doing very well, but when you look at the process of the implementation of mediation and ADR, it took a lot of ups and downs for them. And on that note, I would like to mention that this is for our consideration, that the approach that is taken by mediators, or the approach taken by the ADR practitioners or mediation practitioners is very critical. It's very, very important. It needs to be addressed, because when you look at some of these countries that I've mentioned, some of them, the mediation or ADR was mandated by the government through the courts. And in some instances, it was rejected by the people, because again, you can't implement something that people do not want because of various reasons, which those governments were able to find out, and they were able to sort it out. Now, in our case, in other cases, the program actually as community mediation, where community mediation centers were established, and NGOs took up the running of the centers, and it worked. And when the government noticed that it is working, they now collaborated with the NGOs and the beneficiaries, that is the communities, and gathered information, as Susan put it, the research, and they were able now to streamline it and adopt it as policy, government policy. So I'm looking at a situation where in our nation, for instance, in Kenya, or around other countries which are yet to develop the ADR, either through the government, through the mandatory mediations, or through support groups like the NGOs. And for this particular case regarding Wasilianahub, Wasilianahub is a group or an organization which can be used to launch the practice of mediation and ADR. And then from there now, we liaise with the stakeholders, the policymakers, and of course the political wing, because we really cannot operate or implement it successfully without political support, adequate political support, without adequate community support, without adequate financial resources, and also without well-trained, honest human resources. That is now the mediators and the ADR practitioners. So there is need for all those things to be combined. And I look at a situation where the forums like now Wasiliana and others could come up with approaches in which we can use to get the mediation or the ADR practice to be accepted and be implemented and practiced and later on adopted as policy by the government. My other point is on sustainability. The sustainability of the program will be based on the professionalism, as Susan rightly put it in her presentation. It will be based on the professionalism that is now for us trainers who are training like Jesilo. We need to have a curriculum that is all encompassing. And we are looking at a curriculum of moving from just a plain professionalism in mediation, which has not been looking at, or rather including some aspects of law. And we are now moving towards, in which we are doing conversations around that, towards including within the training that mediators have been getting, we include some basic law, because most mediators are not really lawyers or advocates in this case. We are including a topic, a unit on basic law and also basic psychology. So this will make mediators to be in a position that to capture, to be all-rounded and to have an idea of law. So those are my contributions on the sustainability of the project. Then as I gave the points earlier on adequate human resources, whereby the people adequately and adequately trained and also honest, adequate political support, support from the community, and also financial resources, then the program can be sustainable. And it's really something for the Wasilianahub also to really think about, Wangari, that how can we come up with a way of now amalgamating all these other groups which are coming up and see how we can forge forward as one group. Because like in, I think South Africa, or is it Bolivia or Bangladesh, or it is the NGOs that brought it in. And then the government was like, yes, it's working. The community has accepted it. And people are going to the mediators. So they now supported from that point. So as much as we are looking at the policy formulation from the government side, they also need to see, the government needs to see our contribution in all this. And as my colleague Kimutai put it, we need to have unity in how we are doing things, oneness, so that we can have a regulated practice. Ethics are also very important. The code of ethics, professional code of ethics are important in the sustainability of the project. Again, which the judiciary has set, and we can also add our contribution to that. So based on the, if you look at our geographical considerations and our communities, the levels of literacy in our community, looking at the level of awareness to ADR and mediation in our community, in our countries, all over the world, actually, there is need for a lot of education to the people to increase or rather sensitizing the people to increase the level of awareness in ADR and mediation, so that the program can go through. So I don't know whether I have, I'm still on the line of where Susan's presentation, but those are my observations from the ground, from experience as a trainer for the last 1 year. So thank you so much. I don't wish to take more time on that. Thank you, and over to you, Wangari.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, we appreciate your remarks, Mediator Christina Gatura, and also Mediator Kimutai Cherono, which some of them also help Susan to understand our context as she's giving us her feedback and her views. We will be on call for an additional 5 minutes for kindly Susan to give us her remarks, and then we can be able to close this conversation. Thank you, colleagues. Susan, kindly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. Your comments, Kimutai and Christina, are, yes, quite well suited. Maybe Kimutai, I can give some guidance on the various mediation bills that have been presented. So we had a similar situation where with the data protection bills where the Senate had drafted one and the Ministry of ICT had also drafted a data protection bill. And of course, there were overlapping issues that were not speaking to each other. So one of the ways that the technology TESPOC, I forget what the acronym stands for, but the Technology Technology Service Providers of Kenya Association challenged and was able to then get a congruent data protection bill, which was passed in November 2019, as you know, and is now an act. Was they approached both, they reviewed both the Senate bill and the ministry bill. They then wrote the issues that they had within each bill and said why this issue needed to be addressed differently, why this issue needed to be addressed differently. And then they were able to give a comparison of the benefits of what the two bills were proposing. So in other words, they were able to convince the Senate and the ministry that yes, there are certain elements of the both bills that are good that need to come together, and these are the places where they are clashing, and this is how to resolve them from their point of view. And they were successful in doing that. So the good thing is that they were able to then, so they formed an alliance with the Senate and the ministry and then approached them with the same recommendations. And when they went to Parliament, they also went and gave Parliament the same recommendations and said, Parliament actually threw it out and said, yes, you two need to come back to us with one bill that reads from the same format and that has the private sector support. So that is one of the ways that you can do it. I agree it is difficult sometimes to get the attention of policymakers, but with that kind of a strategy, they actually then come back to you, because the Senate, whenever they have questions, they kept going back to TESPOC to ask, what do you think about this? We want to consider this. So it actually formed a very good relationship for them. I'm glad that you've mentioned research. And Christina, I think one of the points that you brought out actually about relationships, you've seen the benefits that you were able to identify that some of the training was not up to standard. Some of that information is not something that you would have gotten from the public domain had you not had that relationship with a particular ministry. I forget what institution you mentioned, but those are some of the benefits of having a relationship with some of these MDAs, relevant MDAs. I also just wanted to mention on Kimutai's point. So my chart, if I can just share my screen as well, sorry. I believe you were referring to this chart when you talked about the citizens being on the outside. So this chart, if I can just say, is really, it was really a demonstration of the influence of different stakeholders. So the reason why citizens and businesses are really on the outskirts is because they play a very small role in the policymaking process. So yes, it would be good for the citizens to know, and it is important for them when it comes to implementation, say, for example, of regulations. But in terms of actually passing a policy process, they have very little influence, and that's why you tend to see them on the outside. So I hope that has clarified that for you. But yes, it is important to ensure that once a policy has been passed, citizens are then aware of what is the implication for them, what actions do they need to do for it to be effected, for it to be effected and to be effective within the environment. The other point I wanted to make is, and that also lines up to the point that you were bringing up about educating the public and the policymakers about the benefits of the proposed recommendations and your arguments. So yeah, it's important. You can use the registry for settlements just as a source to then collect all of the dispute resolutions that have been done. So it is only at that point when it becomes important for the citizens to know once the policy has been implemented. But you raise a good point, especially with regards to mediation. I think Wasiliano really needs to think carefully about some of how much intervention do you want government to have? How much power in terms of the legislation do you want to give government with regards to the mediation law? Because as you mentioned, again, having too much government intervention can actually create rigidity within the mediation process, and then it becomes a redundant law. So it's important to think about some of those consequences or some of the effects in terms of how will the implementation structure be, and will the law facilitate implementation, or will it prevent it from actually being able to be implemented? So it's a fine line to balance, even for the Wasilianahub. Yeah, I think Christina had some good points. I like the fact that she's done her research. She's been able to identify, how it has taken a while for other countries to get to the situation. But again, remember that as with the 5-step approach, if I can just go here, advocacy really is a process, and it is a marathon. We tend to say advocacy, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So as Kimutai mentioned, yes, you need to have a long-term investment in it, but that long-term investment actually reaps effects. So don't be worried about the hurdles, just keep at it, keep focusing, make sure that the conversation stays relevant, and continuing to interact with governments, even as governments change, even as political arenas change. It's important to just keep the same advocacy strategy going and the same message going. Like I said, it is a 5-step process, but follow-up is actually the most important, and feedbacks into all of the previous 4. So it really is a marathon, but I wish you the best. And I believe that if there are already 2 bills out there, it means that it's something that needs to be addressed and will be addressed comprehensively with the right approach and the right recommendations. So yeah, thank you very much for your comments and for your feedback. That has been good. I can share the slides that I have presented just to provide an overview for the parts that Kimutai missed. But otherwise, thank you. It has been a very fruitful session, and I hope it has been of benefit to you as well. Wangari, I can hand back to you.
Thank you very much for this discussion, Susan. I will request that Mediator Kimutai may kindly give the vote of thanks for this discussion, so that we can be able to wrap. And thank you very much again, Mediator Christina Gatura. Christina Gatura is mediator and a mediation trainer. She's the founder of the Jesilo Consultancy Kenya. Kimutai Cherono is a mediator and an advocate, and is the proprietor of the Compleat Consultants Africa. Susan Waruhiu, who has been our speaker for today on the 30th day of November 2020, during our pre-conference day at the African International Mediation Week and Strategy Conference, which is running from December 1st to the 4th of December. She has been taking us through a masterclass for international best practice in policy making and advocacy and networking. So once again, I say on behalf of the community, thank you very much, Susan Waruhiu. Please pass our best regards to your team. Also, please thank your directors, and also please thank the fund manager, Mr. Kabiru, who was with us, and we know that we will be able to engage with him in other sessions. So thank you for the discussion on development of policy and advocacy. Mediator Kimutai Cherono, kindly you may give the vote of thanks, and then we will close with the national anthem. Thank you. Kimutai?
Thank you very much. Just going to repeat, thank you very much, Susan, for giving us your time and your expertise. It is much appreciated. And it also helps, especially when people are thinking, it helps them concretize or solidify an approach which needs to be made. I also like to thank everybody else for turning up for this session. I know time is actually the most important resource we have, and I'm glad that you're able to put it towards this. Asanteni sana, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Kimutai. We will now have the national anthem. Kindly, we have posted the Wasilianahub website, which is wasilianahabmediators.co.ke. Kindly visit, and you will find the whole program for the conference for the virtual African International Mediation Week, and you will be able to also find the link to be able to access the sessions for your ease. Our next session is tomorrow morning, and tomorrow morning we'll be having a very important discussion. Tomorrow morning we'll be having a discussion on the Singapore Convention, and leading the discussion on the Singapore Convention, we will be having the Singapore International Mediation Center, the deputy CEO, who is Mr. Tejo Lin, and also the center manager, who is Ms. Lee Zomin. Our panel for tomorrow for this session will be Mr. Juan Adenuga, who is from Nigeria and is the chairman of the advisory board for the ODR Africa network, a very important network for mediators to get to know now, because it deals with the with people who deal with and mediators who deal with online dispute resolution. We will also have Madam Jacqueline Oyuyo-Gibenzi, who is a non-executive director at the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration Kenya, and managing partner of Umkizi Limited Liability Partnership. We'll also have on panel Mediator Sarah Ter, who is a mediator and who is the moderator of our virtual sessions and the practice sector lead. We will also have Mwalimu William Magan, who is part of the Faculty of Law at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa and an advocate, and at Agan and Associates. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for joining us for this particular session. So our session tomorrow will focus on international commercial mediation and how the Singapore Convention is opening a new era in the commercial dispute resolution space. So we now will have the words of the national anthem, and then we can be able to close this session. Ee Mungu, nguvu yetu, ilete baraka kwetu, haki iwe ngao na mlinzi, na tukae na undugu, amani na uhuru, raha tupate na ustawi. Once again, we look forward to being with you in the subsequent sessions. Have a blessed day. Thank you.